process for that. And me and Braden have had several calls where we're talking about the best way to do that without it just being completely arbitrary. But I do want to encourage you to, be thinking about that, thinking about things where we can bring Rotarians together, even in smaller groups. Aside from that, I don't have any family of Rotary announcements that I received. Does anybody have anything they want to share with the group in terms of family Rotary announcements? Any other announcements anybody wants to make for the benefit of the greater group? All right, well, I appreciate you all being here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Brady, who is one of our guests today and spoke to us back in, Tim, like in the spring, right?
Yeah, a couple times. I mean,
Yeah.
Pale Fire and Rotary are great friends.
Yeah, so Tim, take it away.
Yeah, so hi, Tim Brady. I'm the founder of Pale Fire Brewing Company for any strangers out there, although I see a ton of friends. Um, and yeah, once again, thank you, you guys. Anytime Rotary involves us, Pale Fire, me personally, is a very nice honor, and I appreciate it. The Zoom days are a little bit weird. Normally, I'm a handshake and hug guy, and normally when I speak at Rotary, you guys feed me breakfast. But so this is a little bit different. But yeah, really exciting. Really, really cool personal connection. You guys are in for a treat today. Gary Noesner, who is speaking today, just incredible. I mean, head hostage negotiator for the FBI for years and years and years. I mean, this is a man who spoke to David Koresh personally on the telephone. That's incredible. At the same time, this is, for me, this is Poppy. This is my kid's grandparent. I've seen him on his back rolling around with my grandkids. So it's special. And I think one of the things when I was looking, forward to this, one of the things I was thinking about is just how different that dichotomy is, and the fact that somebody who is so tough and is stared down such just difficult situations, at the same time is somebody who is so compassionate and empathetic in everyday life, when it comes to family and life. And I'm going to let Gary obviously speak on all of this, but I've just always been impressed by that can go out into everyday life and deal with situations of this magnitude, and then use tools like compassion and empathy to have those situations. I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but those are tools that can be used in the toughest situations in life, but that are also just very important in everyday life. You guys are gonna, there's gonna be some great stories coming up. I'm looking forward to hearing everything that Gary says. Yeah, I'm gonna pass off and just say that you guys are in for a treat. Gary is a great, wonderful story teller. There's a couple things. Anyway, Gary, thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, Tim. and I'm sure that was a challenge for you to speak nice words about your father-in-law.
Yeah.
That can never be an easy task, but hopefully I won't embarrass the family in front of all these great people here from Harrisonburg. Um, I don't have a lecture today. I just want to talk to you about some things that I think you may find interesting and I think relevant, as Tim was suggesting. You know, one could suggest that if some of the communication skills that we taught in the FBI, lessons learned, if they can be successful in a life and death situation, then certainly they stand a better chance of helping you in less life and death threatening situations, in relationships with your subordinates, your superiors, your coworkers, your certainly your family and your friends. Um, you know, everything in life, basically, because we're social animals, it all comes down to relationships. Everything. I would challenge any of you to really, you know, articulate that relationships aren't key or important. Of course they are. We want to work with people we like and respect, and people in turn who we feel like and respect us. So even in the tensest of situations, if we can avoid overreacting, you know, I wrote a book called Stalling for Time about my FBI negotiation career, and I start each chapter with a famous quote, and the one I like the most is a partial quote from Rudyard Kipling, and it's basically, if you can keep your head about you when all else are losing theirs. It's a really powerful quote that, and I think people who are successful in life and who avoid becoming overly emotional and thereby having their ability to think and behave limited, I think those people that can remain calm, cool, and collected and can begin to assess a problem in a non-emotional way are most likely to make the best decisions and behave in the most appropriate way to achieve whatever end is you're trying to achieve. So, well, let me give you a little bit of history. I retired from the FBI in 2003. I had a 30-year career. I like to tell people my parents gave me to the FBI at a young age. And so I was 22 years old, and I started out with the FBI, and I had wanted to become a special agent since I was a kid growing up in Atlantic Beach, Florida. And I had, some of you are a little bit older might remember this, but there used to be a TV show called the Mickey Mouse Club. And I was about 8 years old, I suppose. And they had an episode where the young host went to the FBI headquarters in DC and actually interviewed J. Edgar Hoover. And, you know, Hoover's talking about chasing spies and organized crime figures and bank robberies and, you know, machine guns from the side of running board cars, all sorts of things that as a young man, I thought that was pretty darn neat. And my mom came home from work that day and I told her all about it. And I wanted to be a G-man, and she went out and bought a book. And anyway, it sort of came true some years later, and I was never disappointed. It was a pretty exciting and interesting career. And, you know, I always wanted to do something where I could serve my country and make a contribution, make a difference. And that was just the one that settled for me, that particular career. When I became an agent, there was a fairly new development in law enforcement. It was called hostage negotiations. I mean, it was only a few years old. And how it started was, if you look at up to New York City, we'd had the Attica prison situation in upstate New York that resulted in, you know, good many deaths. 10 hostages and 29 inmates were killed in a situation that was handled very badly. We had the Olympic massacre in Munich. We had the Dog Day Afternoon incident in New York that some of you recall from the Al Pacino movie, which was run in a very chaotic and haphazard way. So NYPD decided they need to come up with a better method, and they came up with this approach called hostage negotiations. And in essence meant you contained the situation where it was, and you opened up a dialogue to try to persuade the perpetrators to cooperate. And not long after they put something together, they had an infamous situation, Al's Sporting Goods shop in 73 that did not come out so well. So they fine-tuned the negotiation program. At the same time, in 1971, near where I was from, in Jacksonville, Florida, the FBI mishandled a hijacking. A man had hijacked a small aircraft with a woman and a man, a pilot and a woman passenger. In those days, the FBI didn't have negotiators, so they shot the wheels out of the plane, thinking, well, that'll keep him from taking off. And instead, the man killed the pilot and the woman and killed himself. Big lawsuit, Downs versus the U.S., and the FBI was found to have not employed every technique they could have to try to resolve it peacefully. So those things in combination prompted not only what NYPD did, but what we did in the FBI. The FBI in those days pretty much provided almost all the training for police around the country. That was part of our mission. Still is to some extent, but not to the extent it was back then. And we quickly realized New York had a good concept, and we stole it lock, stock, and barrel. And we began to, apply our resources and our agents with psychological backgrounds and PhDs to kind of really assess it and break it down, and why does it work. And then we began to teach it not only around the States, but overseas. And through that interaction with police officers around the country, we began to hear their stories and learn the do's and don'ts about how this works and why it works. And I should tell you that in those days, what we were really focused on was bargaining. If you think about a hostage situation, it's someone holding someone else for the fulfillment of a substantive demand. Somebody wants something, they can't get it on their own. So by holding a hostage, they feel they can compel the authorities to give them what they want. Now that could be a getaway car, it could be release my brother from jail, it could be any number of things. But there has to be a substantive demand. If there's no substantive demand, the person being held is not even a hostage, they're actually a victim by definition. But be that as it may, we were bargaining with these people. So the FBI would show up at a bank robbery where some guy's making an unauthorized withdrawal, and we would say, we'd talk to them and convince them that, this wasn't going to work out the way they had anticipated. And initially they used the hostages as a shield. You come in here, I'll kill the hostages, which is really only another way of telling you that they want to live and they're scared of you coming in. Well, that's important to know. If the person we're dealing with wants to live more than what they want to die, that gives them some significant ability to influence their behavior. But we made them work for everything. If a guy was in a bank with 6 hostages and he, after several hours, wanted food, we would say, I can get you some food, but I'm not sure my boss is going to go for that unless you send out 1 or 2 of those hostages. And, then I can work with him and show him that you're somebody reasonable. And bad guys would typically realize pretty quickly that it's quid pro quo. If they didn't do something for us, they weren't going to get anything from us. One of the great stories we told early in those days, we had a hijacking in New York, and this guy wanted to fly to Europe, a young man. It was Kennedy Airport, and the FBI was trying to negotiate with him. We didn't have much of a program then, but one of the agents was talking to the fella on the plane holding the gun, and the guy was very arrogant, very demanding, felt very empowered, felt he could make us do whatever he wanted because he was threatening hostages. Well, at some point he asked for a hot cup of coffee, cream, and 2 sugars. Well, about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, coffee was delivered to him, cold, no cream and no sugar. And a short time after that, he surrendered. And he was asked, why did you surrender? And he said, well, I figured if I couldn't get the hot cup of coffee, this other stuff wasn't going to work out. And it kind of is a silly little story, but it speaks volumes about the sort of power game that you have in a classic hostage situation. Well, let's move forward. When I became a negotiator in 1980, I was not an originator. I was what you would call second generation out of God knows how many generations we have now. But I was also working terrorism as a field office agent, working other kinds of investigations. And I became a negotiator and began to teach it part-time and to respond to situations the FBI was involved in. And in one of the teaching assignments, when I was asked eventually to become a full-time negotiator, Quantico, one of 3, we found out that we were teaching the wrong stuff. Most police negotiators were, in fact, never negotiating a pure hostage situation. They're pretty rare. They constitute 10% or less of what police do. Instead, we sort of had an epiphany that 90% of what cops were doing were emotionally driven situations. Guy's holding his boss because his boss fired him. A guy holding his girlfriend because she's threatened to leave him. A guy holding his neighbor because they're having an argument over a fence. In those situations, there's no clear goal, um, no compelling demand made against the cops. I mean, if somebody says go away, that's not a substantive demand. Substantive demand is something more physical. So we realized that we needed a different set of skills for that, and we looked and we borrowed from the mental health community. The famous psychologist Carl Rogers had come up with a set of skills called active listening skills, and we found that those were very, very appropriate because, in essence, we were dealing with people in crisis, people upset, angry, no clear goal, not sure what they wanted to achieve, had no thought about getting out of what they got into. They were, in every sense of the word, in crisis. And these skills were basically, they boiled down to responding to somebody in a way that is a restatement of content. Here's what's going on with you, and a reflection of emotions. It sounds to me, you're very upset, you're confused, you're angry, whatever it might be. And when we accurately paraphrase in our own words and feedback what we're hearing, and we get it right, it lets this person know that we've listened and we understood. You know, that's why we call it active listening. Listening is not a passive endeavor where you just nod your head. It is essentially demonstrating your understanding through paraphrasing in your own words what they've just said and what you perceive as the feelings that they're having. The wonderful thing about it is even if you get it wrong, then they'll turn around and correct you. You know, Quentin, you sound very angry. And Quentin says, no, I'm not angry, I'm disappointed. Well, that's important to know, isn't it? That's the driving emotion that is leading to the behavior that he's demonstrating. This began to have pretty significant results where all of a sudden cops and FBI negotiators around the country were now being taught specific skills that could be practiced and demonstrated for proficiency and then utilized in a very wide set of circumstances. We began to get in a plus 90% success rate. And people say, well, that's a nice warm and fuzzy thing you guys did. And the reality is we didn't do it for that at all. We did it to keep cops safe. When we negotiate a tough and dangerous situation, we have two alternatives. We either sit out there forever and wait, or if things are bad enough, cops have to go in and risk life and limb to try to rescue a hostage or a victim or make an arrest. So every time we could prevent police officers from putting themselves in danger and being able to go home to their families at night was viewed as a huge success for us. Unfortunately, we don't know the thousands of police officer lives and other lives that have been saved through the years in this process, but we're quite certain anecdotally and impressionistically that it's a significant amount. It's thousands and thousands. And that's good, and that's worthwhile. You know, you're all community leaders, you're community business people. You have a police department, and that police department serves the community. They want to and need to be seen as public servants. And the public demands that, even though we support the police more often than not, that if the police take some very dangerous action and are compelled or whatever to take life, there has to be a clear reason for that. We don't kill people because we can't. We use deadly force because we're left with no alternative. That's the threshold we have to reach. We can't say, you know, we got tired and, you know, we've been out there 10 hours and it was costing a lot of money and, you know, we decided we just go ahead and shoot the guy. You know, I mean, that may be fine in some police movie, but it's just not going to work in real life. You have a court of law that you have to explain your actions to, and there's a court of public opinion that in many ways may be as important or more. So we need to demonstrate that when we take action, it's not because we wanted to, but the behavior, the actions of the perpetrator, or as they say in New York, perpetrator, left us with no choice. And that's the threshold we have to achieve. So it's important that we have slowly changed the culture in law enforcement. Police officers are kind of action-oriented folks. You know, they're trained to identify a problem, resolve the problem, and move on to the next problem. Boom, boom, boom. We also are given a badge and a gun and authority. And then we confront somebody that says, screw you and your badge and your authority. We don't like it. We're human beings. It pisses us off. Oh yeah? You don't think I have any authority? Watch this nightstick as it meets your face. I mean, you can see what happens in some situations. And that's why we say the biggest thing for a police officer, biggest thing for a negotiator, certainly is self-control. The premise being that if you can't control your own emotions, how can you begin to control or influence someone else's? So that's the first step. I helped in a situation in Rapid City, South Dakota many, many years ago where police lieutenant was talking to a young kid that took over his high school class with a gun. Very dangerous situation. And the young man was arrogant and cocky, and in the negotiations began to insult the lieutenant's wife. Oh, your wife's a whore. She's this, she's that. And it took a lot of restraint, but the police lieutenant let that be water off a duck's back. He didn't rise to the occasion, didn't allow it to take him off his agenda of trying to influence this young man positively. And eventually the young man stopped the line of insults because he wasn't getting a rise out of the lieutenant. But that's the kind of self-control that we need from a police officer. Since Tim introduced me and his family, I'll share a little family story that happened to me years ago. We were on the Washington Mall for the 4th of July. And I used to take my family down there. I had friends in the park police that had us let us park the car real close to where the fireworks went off. And soon my family became most of the neighborhood. And everybody wanted to go down there, and we'd have a picnic all day long and enjoy the fireworks later. And I'm having some adult beverages and baked beans, potato salad, the whole 9 yards. And my beeper goes off back when we carried beepers. And I recognized the area code for South Carolina. I call the number, and it's one of my colleagues, an FBI negotiator en route to Charleston Harbor. And he says, there's a gunman that's taken over the USS Yorktown, which was a decommissioned US aircraft carrier that was now a museum in Charleston Harbor, still is. And in this moment of clarity I had based on the 2 beers I'd already drank, I told him, this is a highly symbolic day. That is what you would call a pre-symbolic venue, an aircraft carrier. I said, I suspect we're going to be dealing with a disgruntled veteran, and this is going to take a lot of time and patience. And he obviously is frustrated about things and is doing this to be heard because he doesn't think people are hearing him. So I said, when you get there, find out more about what's going on and call me back, and I'll have more words of wisdom for you. And I go back to whatever I was doing. Half hour later, an hour later, the beeper goes off again. I call the number, and a guy answers the phone and says, hello. I said, hi, this is Gary Noesner calling from Washington. Is Mike Duke there? That's my guy's name. No, he's not here. I said, well, is this the negotiation room? No, it's not. So was this the command post? No, it's not. And the guy says to me, who'd you say you were again? I said, I'm Gary Noesner. I'm the chief negotiator from the FBI calling from Washington. And he says, I guess I'm in more trouble than I thought. And I said, you wouldn't by chance be the guy with the gun, are you? Well, yes, I am, as a matter of fact. Well, unbeknownst to my people, the telephone number at the souvenir shop on the dock where they had set up their command post could also be answered up in the ship where Jim was. He had discharged his weapon several times, obviously drew a lot of response from law enforcement, and no one had been hurt at all, thankfully, but it was a pretty tense situation. So I said, well, Jim, I said, I'm not supposed to be talking directly with you, but how you doing, And of course, he indicated he'd been having better days, and I realized I'd had better days myself. And we chatted for a while, and I'll cut through what could be a long story, but eventually I was able to extract myself from the phone call. But you know what? I was right. Jim was a veteran from Vietnam. He was drug and dependency addicted. He'd gone through really tough times in his life. He didn't feel as though he'd been given the treatment or the care or support he needed. Didn't have a family supporting him, didn't have a job. And he was desperate and frustrated and all the above. So I calmed him down a good bit and eventually got him back talking to the negotiators at the scene, and they eventually invested some hours into it, but they got him to surrender. And I think everybody felt good about that. Fortunately, he hadn't killed or hurt anybody, but this man served our country. I mean, he served our country honorably, and he deserved our time. He deserved our attention, and he deserved a thoughtful law enforcement negotiation response, not a come out or we're going to come in and get your ass kind of thing. So that's just an example of so many that occur and the way we should approach it. You know, with all the protests going on, I've done a few interviews about law enforcement protests that we've seen in recent months. And I cite two cases where we used it near the end of my career. One was in '96 in Montana. It was 3 years after the tragedy at Waco, and we had a group of anti-government people on this sprawling ranch land, had engaged in a variety of different illegal activities, had intimidated local authorities. So the FBI came out there. We, unlike Waco, which was started by ATF, we arrested the leaders and figured we'd have a good opportunity to talk the others out. And we had, again, lured the leaders off the property. But unfortunately, it left them leaderless and rudderless. And they did not trust the government. They didn't believe we had authority over them. We didn't have any jurisdiction over them. It took us, using intermediaries, people they trusted, quite a few weeks to even be able to set up a meeting. In fact, it was halfway through the 85-day ordeal before we actually sat down face to face, FBI negotiators and Freeman. And I remember my boss said, well, what are you going to tell them when you get out there? I said, I'm not going to tell them anything. I'm going to listen to them. And that's what we did. We said, hey, you know, we want to understand what your beliefs are and your views on, you know, the legal aspects of this and so forth and so on. We were calm, we were measured, we were respectful. We didn't denigrate them or criticize them. And that in turn slowly began to open up the opportunities for further dialogue, which in the end led to a peaceful surrender. Nobody knows about the case because unlike Waco, it didn't end tragically, but it was a great success because unlike Waco, now the negotiation team kind of led the way and we were able to use our skills to lower the emotional level. You know, I always use the childhood teeter-totter. If you'll follow my hands for a minute here, you know, one side's up, one side's down. And if emotions are high, rational thinking and behavior are low. And you can't change that. That's just part of the human condition. So one of the things we do as negotiators, we push emotions down. And you see what happens when we do that, right? Rational thinking and behavior rises. And I think you can use that in your everyday life. You know, when you're confronting an angry customer, an angry employee, vendor, whatever it might be, your first task is not to persuade them the error of their position because they're wrong, but to deal with the emotions and to ask them in a respectful way, well, let me make sure I understand what you're saying and let me try to put that in my own words. Did I get that right? Is there something I didn't understand? And typically people who are very angry are really trying to shout out their frustration and their anger when they feel as though nobody's really heard them or listened to them. And you can really alleviate a lot of that by being a good listener. And you'll have your time to say what you want to say, but initially, what Stephen Covey, the business guru, says, first seek to understand and then to be understood. I mean, this is a powerful, powerful tool to use, whether you're in sales or any kind of business. And I know most of you are business people, and I don't care what your business is, all of this has application. So restatement of content, what happened to you? What's your concern? What's the issue with our business? And the reflection of feeling, because as you feel like we let you down, you're disappointed, you're very frustrated at our inability to fix the problem. You can do those things without agreeing or disagreeing. You're merely acknowledging how the person looks at things and feels about things. And I will tell you, it is the most powerful tool of social engagement that there is. And you can use it in everyday life. I retired in '03 and I did consulting full-time for 5 years on overseas kidnappings. And I still do some corporate speaking, pre-COVID at least. And I just tell a story. A couple of years ago, I was in Memphis, Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm at a bar at a hotel. I got to speak the next day. I'm not with a group of people. I'm by myself. So I do what I always do. I go to the bar and I, order a steak, have a glass of wine, talk to the bartender, watch the game, whatever it is. And I usually try to have what I call the target du jour. and it could be old, young, male, female, doesn't matter. I'm going to strike up a conversation with somebody at the bar. And the task I put on myself is I want to know everything I can about this person. So I'm at the bar and this guy comes walking up to the bar, and very busy man. He's got medical scrubs on. And he doesn't even sit down at the bar. He just stands at the bar and orders a drink to take back up to his room. And I just look over at him. He's right next to me. I said, "Excuse me, sir. I can't help but notice you have medical scrubs on. Are you a doctor? Have you just come from some sort of an emergency?" He says, "No. He said, I'm a medical device salesman." I said, "Oh, well, that's very interesting." I said, "May I ask why you have medical scrubs on?" He said, well, I go into surgery. I teach doctors how to install hips and knees and elbows and whatever joints were being replaced. Now, in our society, we put doctors up at the very highest level. So I said, "So you teach doctors how to do this?" You could see him kind of stand up a little straighter, chest puffed out a little bit. "Well, yes, I do." Well, I'm going to, again, make what could be a long story fairly short by saying after about 30 minutes, while Jim drank his drink and his name was Jim and ordered another, I know everything about Jim. I know where he went to school. I know where he lives. I know his wife's name, his kids' names. I know what he likes and he doesn't like. And it's a fascinating. He's told me a lot about medical devices that I never knew and probably would have never learned otherwise. And it was a pretty fascinating conversation. By this time, I'm done with my meal. I'm ready to go to bed. And I said, "Jim, I got to tell you," I said, "that was the most fascinating conversation I've had in a long time. Thank you so much for sharing all that with me. And I got to go. I got a speech tomorrow." And he looks at me finally and says, "What was your name again?" I said, "Oh, my name is Gary Noesner." He said, "And where do you work?" I said, "Well, I'm just retired. I was the former chief hostage negotiator of the FBI. Good night." And I turned to walk away. And there's sort of a mirror in the bar, and I could look back at Jim. He's going like, "What? Maybe I could have learned a good story or two if I had, asked some questions." But I would recommend that to everybody. And when you're out and about, no, don't be phony about it. Be sincere. I'd really like to learn more about what you do. We don't have them so much in the age of COVID, but the proverbial neighborhood Christmas party where you meet a new set of neighbors and you find yourself in the kitchen with the other guys or gals getting a beer or whatever you're doing. Pick an opportunity to learn more about this person. Tell me about yourself. And you may have some common interests. And even if you don't, you learn something about what they're interested in. I was at a bar in Texas once, and I sat next to this young guy and I talked to him, nice fella, and his hobby was tight roping, and next thing you know, he's pulling up pictures on his camera, his backyard, he's got a tightrope and he's got the pole and he's out there walking. And man, that's a case where I didn't want to leave. I'm saying, you got to tell me about this. How did you get it? What prompted you to set up a high wire bar in your backyard and go about doing this? But it was fascinating what you can learn about people if you take the time and energy to listen to them, and you'll get your chance to address their questions when it comes along later on. But just a couple little things I wanted to share with you. I'm not sure how much time we have yet, Quentin or Braden, but I don't know if people have questions and we can go into that. It's just, I just wanted to say that, in this age, particularly our political divisiveness, as I think the man who gave the prayer said, we have to be thoughtful. We have to take the time to listen to others. And it's okay if we disagree, it's fine, but we can do it respectfully. We can do it without name calling and demonizing and discounting somebody because they are voting for somebody we don't like or they have a different opinion. It's tough sometimes, but that's the pathway through which we're going to accomplish things to our mutual benefit. So what do you think, guys? Some Q&A?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, Gary, thank you so much for presenting to us this afternoon. I resonate with a lot of what you've said and have found similarities to my own work in fundraising for a university. Not to say that fundraising is a hostage situation, although maybe some folks think that. But
it's a challenge.
Active listening is an incredible tool that we all can use. in our daily. So just a big thank you to you, Gary. There are a couple questions here that have come in through the chat that I'll ask you, and I'm sure that it'll take you down
Sure.
all their stories.
Mhm.
So the first one, your life has been, of course, made into a book, which we have the link to, but also into the Waco miniseries. And so a couple of us have asked about what your thoughts were on the Waco miniseries. How well did it blend your book and others' testimonies from inside the facility?
Yeah, good question. I was contacted some years ago by the producers that wanted to do this miniseries on Waco, and they had already purchased the rights to a book by David Thibodeau, one of the Waco survivors, Branch Davidian, one of Koresh's followers. And they wanted to use his book to take a look at the inside looking out, and then they wanted my book for the outside looking in, because I've probably written the only book from the law enforcement point of view, particularly the negotiation point of view. I think by and large, I like that idea of the dual approaches of looking at the problem. I think they did an overall good job of showing the challenges and the emotional uh, conduct of the whole case. I stand by the portrayal of the FBI, as ugly as it was. Mistakes were made, serious mistakes were made. I think I have a few issues with the beginning of the show. Sort of makes it look like ATF shot first, and I don't know that they did or didn't. But as I understand, the investigation never clearly established who did. So I'm loath to have that as the accepted truth. The other thing was they painted David Koresh far too sympathetically. I mean, in real life, he was a very sinister, very manipulative guy. And the young actor Taylor Kitsch from Friday Night Lights, who played him, was absolutely brilliant. And I think to some extent made him more likable on screen than he was remotely close to in real life. And then the third thing at the end, and I was not there then, I was only at Waco the first half, and proud of the fact that all 35 people came out when I was there under my watch. But at the end, they suggest pretty strongly the FBI started the fire. And I know there's a lot of people that hate the government and think that's the case, but it just doesn't, it's not borne out by the facts. And there's no question that the FBI's inserting tear gas prompted the Davidians to start the fire, but it's also unambiguously clear that they started the fire on Koresh's command. So, I mean, it's a tragic, tragic event. I believe it could have been handled by us far better. As bad as Koresh was, we should have been able to deal with that better. But overall, I was fortunate. Michael Shannon played me. I mean, the guy's twice Academy Award nominated actor and has become a good guy and a friend. And Tim and Kelly and our other family members were all able to go up to the premiere in New York, and we had quite a great time hanging out with some of those folks. So Tim can share stories with you, I'm sure. But yeah, so I hope that answered the question. I overall like the show, but opinions are so strong. You either think the Davidians were nut jobs and got what they deserved, and clearly they all weren't, or the FBI and the government decide, let's go out there and kill those people. And that's just as nonsensical. So like most things in life, it's gray, it's nuanced, it's complicated. And if you seek an easy, simplistic answer, you're generally not going to have all the information you need.
Thanks for that, Gary. Like, like all of your stories, it's very clear that you understand several sides to every situation, and I really appreciate that perspective. Which leads us into another line of questioning about what you do to practice your non-anxious presence, and how do you become better? How do we become better at staying non-reactive in challenging situations?
Some of it's the old argument of nature versus nurture, and to some extent, I think I inherited a pretty calm demeanor, particularly from my father. I don't think I ever saw my father get ruffled over anything. So I probably mimicked and copied and inherited, whatever you want to say, that. But part of it, you have to work at it too. You have to force yourself and train yourself, knowing that when you start to see that assault, verbally or otherwise, that you have to work hard at not responding to it inappropriately and thereby making it worse than it is. But that self-control issue, again, it's terribly important. And there, and I managed a bunch of people. You can't just the time for
Gary, you were breaking up pretty badly
Yeah,
there.
sorry, Gary.
oh, was I?
Yeah, we couldn't quite hear that last part.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I said, but here. But I just have to. You have to train yourself to a certain extent. When people have a complaint or an issue, don't become defensive. Don't go on the attack. Just take your time and listen. And by doing that, acknowledging, repeating, paraphrasing, you pretty much, in most cases, diffuse that anger. If you want to deal with people in a reasonable way, then you behave reasonable. Um, the old saying, it takes two to argue, and if you're not arguing back, it doesn't eliminate the chance that the person could be angry, but it certainly reduces the fact that they'll stay angry.
You came in loud and clear that time, Gary. Thank you very much for those.
Yeah, I'm afraid I live sort of out in the sticks here at Smith Mountain Lake, so sometimes the internet gods take a hike.
That's all right. Obviously, you have a storied career, Gary, and we had a couple people ask what you think your single greatest accomplishment has been.
Well, that's a good question. Tim has two of them in his house, but I guess I can't really call my grandkids an accomplishment, but I like to look at them as the best part of my life. There's a total of 7 of them through my 3 kids, so that's a great joy. My son Rusty also lives in Harrisonburg, and he has 2 little ones. In the professional context, I mentioned in my opening comments about the embracing of active listening skills. And I will tell you that when I became a full-time negotiator at Quantico and sort of came to that epiphany that we needed to move that way, I spearheaded a very major push in that direction. In 1990, there's negotiation associations and conferences all over the country. Back then, if you had asked in a meeting, has anybody heard of active listening skills, almost no hands would go up. Today, there's not a negotiator in the country for which that is not the bread and butter. And that happened because we put this huge training manual together in the FBI and we taught it all over the world, particularly in the United States. And I think, I'll never know a number, but I think police adopting, embracing, utilizing these skills has saved more lives than I could begin to calculate. And for that, I take a good bit of pride for that.
And rightly so.
I'm lost. Well,
You're breaking up again, Gary.
Well, we have a couple more minutes, Gary, and I have 2 more questions. Let's see if we can get through it before 1 here. One of the questions that I received was around the outcome of several of your negotiation situations. You talked about, I guess, the one in New York, or the one in South Carolina, excuse me. How the vet was dependent on drugs and alcohol and that sort of thing. Do any of your negotiation situations turn out positively in terms of the help that these folks need beyond the time served?
Yeah, often they do. I mean, in some of the most desperate situations, they often have unpleasant outcomes, even if we get the hostages out. I mean, I flew down to Peru when the terrorists took over the Japanese ambassador's residence, and we were able to get a lot of hostages released, but ultimately a tactical team entered and killed all the terrorists. So you can't exactly say I had a happy ending for them. But in most cases, I don't view success or failure in the context did everyone live. I view it in the context, did everyone live that we could get out? And there are just some cases for it's sort of the serenity prayer. You have to know, what you can change and what you can't, and understand the difference. So for me, the gauge is for every innocent life inside there that I get everybody out that I could. And fortunately, the success on that was pretty high, so I felt pretty good. But there's some losses that certainly stick with you and had a big impact.
Well, thank you, Gary. We're just about out of time. I just want to express my thanks to you for being with us today and sharing part of your story. This was really fascinating for all of us. So thank you very much, and thanks to Tim for introducing you so well. I'll turn it over to Quentin now to close us out.
Great, thanks, Braden, and thank you, Gary and Tim. Gary, really appreciate you being here. I know you normally don't do events like this for free, so we greatly appreciate you speaking to us. There's a lot more of Gary's story to tell, and I would encourage everyone to check out his book, Stalling for Time. Really interesting read. I haven't read it. I started reading excerpts of it, though, but I think I'm going to do the whole thing, Gary. It looks really, really cool. And for anyone else, the Waco miniseries, which we mentioned a couple times, is on Netflix right now, so you can see more about that event with Gary's caveats that he mentioned today. So you know what to look for. So Gary, thanks so much for being here. Tim, thanks again for being with us. We appreciate it, brother. Thanks a lot. And for your heartfelt introduction. That was very, very touching. That was cool. We appreciate that. So thanks everybody for being here, and everybody have a great week. Take care.
Bye-bye.